This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the DreamPod by the Dreamcast Junkyard. I am your host Lewis, and today's episode is all about something that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the newly released English fan translation for the Japanese Dreamcast title Nakoruru, The Gift She Gave Me, which I was actually involved with as an editor. Joining me today as my co-host to talk all about this translation project we worked on together is Derek Pascarella, who was essentially the mastermind behind the entire thing. Keen listeners of the DreamPod may recognise Derek from episode 93, where he came on to discuss his translation project of Sakura Wars Columns 2 with us. He has released translations for Rainbow Cotton, Chaos Field, the Evangelion typing games, and even the French-exclusive Taxi 2. Derek, it's a pleasure to have you on the pod again. How are you doing?
Hey there, Lewis, my friend. I am doing excellently, and I am so happy to be here. Like I said on the Sakura Wars Columns 2 episode, if you told me one day I'd be interviewed or part of a DreamPod episode, I would have slapped you and called you a liar. But here I am co-hosting with you, so it's an esteemed pleasure and a privilege. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have you back on and to talk about something that, like I say, is near and dear to my heart and your heart. When it comes to the Dreamcast scene, something that I'm always looking out for is fan translations, and these are projects from passionate members of the community that allow Dreamcast games that were only ever released in countries like Japan to be played by those who can't speak the language, whether that be English speakers, there's Spanish translation projects, there's Polish translation projects. And in 2023, alongside the steady drip of indie Dreamcast titles, when we get one of these new translation projects, it almost feels like we're getting a new Dreamcast game, because there's a lot of games that people like me and you, Derek, when we saw them in magazines back in the day, we thought, oh, what's that? And then we just never got a chance because they remained relegated to somewhere like Japan. They were incredibly text heavy. And unless you could speak the language, you're not going to be able to play that. So obviously these projects from the community allow us to, finally play those games. And so, Derek, I've actually got a translation-related question. It's not about Dreamcast, but it's about just translation projects on other consoles. And I just thought it was a good way to start off the episode. So, before we talk about Nakoruru, what game from another console would you like to see translated into English?
Oh, man, that is a loaded question and a half, but So before answering, I will say that surely anytime you get one of these, if you could just have one type questions, firstly, it's basically impossible to choose one. And secondly, you're going to have another idea later when you reflect back on the question. Oh, why didn't I say that one? Or, whatever. But I've got a little bit of a bizarre answer for you. So there is a game. It was developed by Japan Media Programming, released back in 1996, February 23rd to be exact. And I know the date because it was written about by my friends over at Shiro. It's called Omakase Savers. And you probably out there listening have never heard of Omakase Savers because, well, one, it's a Japanese-exclusive, a bit on the text-heavy side, and also, to be fair, it's probably not the greatest game of all time, but to give a little background on it, it looks more or less like a knockoff of Magic Knight Rayearth. So it features 3 teenage or, early 20s girls who essentially are tasked with saving their town from different ghost invasions and ghosts who are out committing various acts of mayhem and crime, and it's chock full of all kinds of funny FMVs, and it's just it's so Japanese, and I just think it would be a load of fun to play in English one day.
Yeah, I actually really like Magic Knight Rayearth on the Saturn, and so this isn't related to that. It's like a kind of like you say, a knockoff, but I quite like the idea. It's like Magic Knight Rayearth, but it's got like digitized actresses in it. And there's something really like amazing and campy about those kind of games from the 90s, and it really looks really good. I will link the article from Sega Saturn Shiro in the show notes, so if anyone wants to have a look at it, because it does look really interesting and a great choice as well, Derek. So if I had to choose, I'm gonna, you know what, like, you've gone obscure and I'm gonna go possibly more obscure. I don't know what you'd think about that, Derek, but I'm going for a game on the Bandai Wonderswan, which never came outside of Japan, unlike the Saturn. So, probably very obscure. So, the game I would like to see translated into English is Uzumaki Noroi Simulation. I hope I pronounced that right. But this is a game that's an adaptation of the manga by Junji Ito called Uzumaki, which I love. If anyone doesn't know that manga, check it out. But the synopsis is basically there's a town that's being overrun by a curse that's relating to spirals. So all these different bad things that are happening all have some kind of theming around spirals in some way. And there's like a group of people who are trying to flee from this curse, but also try and investigate it. And someone out there thought, we're going to adapt this game to the Bandai Wonderswan, but we're not going to have you try and investigate the curse. We're going to have you be the curse. So this is a game where you basically have a map of the town from Uzumaki, and you go around tormenting people and traveling to various locations and talking with townspeople and collecting items and basically just wreaking havoc. And I remember thinking, you know, it's like if they gave you the option in Sim City to play as the disasters. It's an absolutely like crazy idea, but I'm here for it. And, you know, I'd love to be able to play a game based on something by Junji Ito, because that'd be really cool. So, yeah, that's my choice for that question.
That is an awesome choice. I love the art style, too. I've seen those mangas in a few different shops that I visited over the years. But, you know, Lewis, if you really wanted to go obscure, you know, Bandai Wonderswan, okay. But you gotta tell me Bandai Palladia, and then you're really in obscure territory there.
yeah, or like, I don't know, the Casio Loopy or something. Yeah, we're all for obscure here on the DreamPod. I wonder if the Wonderswan's ever actually been referenced on the pod before. If not, there you go, we've done it.
And you know, there kind of is a little bit of a link, albeit weak. You're talking about a town that's overrun with a curse having to do with a swirl. I mean, do we know of another swirl that has a chokehold over hearts and minds and doesn't let go? I think we do, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, Nakoruru, the game we're talking about today, has a similar plot about, you know, town getting overrun by demons and stuff like that. So anyway, I guess we better dive into what we're here to talk about today, Derek. So basically, I feel like if you're a Dreamcast fan, you've probably played a game like Capcom versus SNK. You probably know about Samurai Shodown or Samurai Spirits, as it's known in Japan. But if you're not aware, it is an arcade fighting series which takes place and is themed around 18th century Japan, and it was first released in '93 in arcades for the Neo Geo MVS arcade hardware, and it was one of SNK's first games to feature weapon-based combat, and it also had one of the best home ports of it back in the day on the 3DO. And it's still going strong to this day. There's been a more recent Samurai Shodown entry back in 2019 on like PlayStation, Xbox, those kind of systems. But one of the most beloved characters from Samurai Shodown is Nakoruru, and she's considered a favorite amongst fans. And in the early 2000s, a developer called Intelets would craft a story that explored Nakoru's character in finer detail, and the result was Nakoruru, The Gift She Gave Me, It has a Japanese title. We, I guess, localized the title to be The Gift She Gave Me.
The original title was essentially, it's really more of a direct translation. The original title was A Gift from That Person, which in English just sounds strange.
Yeah, yeah.
Who is this person? And why are they giving me gifts? But Nakoruru, The Gift She Gave Me, is a lot clearer, and the meaning behind the title becomes more and more clear as the player progresses through the story. The first iteration of this game first came to PC on July 6th, 2001, and funnily enough, one of the things it's remembered most for, which is a little heartbreaking, are some of the bugs that were present in the final retail build. Probably the biggest offender of which is the fact that your saved game is rather prone to corruption and or loss. And it is funny because a little bit of this, I don't want to call it a bug, persists in the Dreamcast version because it's not necessarily a bug that could cause data loss or corruption. But I will say that the way the game handles integrity checks of save files is completely out of spec to what basically the Dreamcast development kit would suggest and kind of call best practices. So there's a kind of like a checksum. For those out there who maybe don't understand that term, maybe you've seen things like MD5 hashes or similar. It's basically a fingerprint that allows you to say, okay, this digital file has this specific digital fingerprint. Therefore, we know that its integrity is intact. And there's a very specific way to do that with the Dreamcast VMU save system. And Nakoruru just says, I'm not going to do that. And it makes me wonder if it's a carryover from whatever shenanigans they were doing on the PC version.
Yeah, well, that kind of is other than our love for the Dreamcast, it's kind of best that we translated the Dreamcast game for that reason as well. The Dreamcast game was released on March the 28th, 2002. Oddly, the standard edition came in a fancy box with a figurine, which I believe was a tactic in Japan to sway people into buying one of these console versions of a game like this rather than just going for the PC version. Also, another kind of amusing tidbit is that the publisher Cool Kiz had another Dreamcast game, one of the Atelier games, and it's one of our most viewed articles on the Dreamcast Junkyard that Tom wrote, where he talks about how basically this game contained a screensaver bundled onto the disc that when you put it in your PC, it would infect your PC with the Kriz virus, which could potentially destroy your entire PC. So me and Derek often call Cool Kiz Cool Kriz just to make fun of them. But anyway, Nakoruru is a visual novel, and we do actually have a DreamPod episode we did a few years back where me and Mike actually discussed visual novels. But to kind of simplify what you're expecting here from the gameplay, it is essentially reading. So you're reading a story, and occasionally you're asked to make a choice which will have an effect on the game's narrative. The game's story is told from the perspective of a 7-year-old orphan called Makato, who is taken in by the people of the snowy village Kamui Kotan. She is selected by the village's chief to serve as assistant to the shrine maiden Nakoruru, and Nakoruru is someone that the people of Kamui Kotan admire for her strength, dependability, and outward positivity. But Makato soon kind of realizes that deep down Nakoruru is just deeply unhappy from the fights that she's had to fight, in her time as Shrine Maiden. And so, yeah, it's basically just a game about Makato sort of almost like kind of a fly on the wall, but she has a little bit more to say. But she's witnessing kind of Nakoruru and her relationships with her childhood friends, and she's trying to help her through this grief that she's facing. Is there anything else you want to add there, Derek?
I think in addition to kind of being a fly on the wall, not only does she kind of monitor and observe the kind of the transformation and the progress that Nakoruru goes through as a person, but she also kind of goes through her own transformation, makes her own realizations, and being only a 7-year-old girl who's very wise beyond her years, she's got quite the story to tell herself by the time the game ends.
Yeah, that's a great addition there. Yeah, so just to put it up front, obviously I've mentioned previously that I was the editor of this project. Derek, you did quite a few things, and I'm sure you'll get to that, but do you want to just shout out the other people that were involved in this project before we get into the nitty-gritty of it?
Absolutely. And if it wasn't for you and all of these other fine folks, this project would have remained a dream and never seen the light of day. So for translation, we have Marshall Wong and Duralumin, both of whom did tremendous work. We also had somebody who goes by Piggy or Witch Piggy doing some additional translation assistance. And for some graphic assistance for the things that I didn't do myself, a guy by the name of Nico and a friend, Danthrax, both contributed. And just as kind of a special thanks for those that either contributed to this project in some way, whether it was moral support or helping out here and there with ideas, or just people who I owe a lot to. I want to say thank you to Lacquerware, Esper Knight, Snowy Aria, Vincent NL of Rent a Hero fame, Sayo, and Hayden Coe.
Excellent, yeah. Derek, I guess, do you want to... Because this all started with you, so I guess do you want to kind of take us back to how this all started then?
Well, it all started in 1987 when I was... No, I'm just kidding. All right, so seriously. So it was back in July 2021. I had just come off of finishing Rainbow Cotton, and it was actually funny. I guess as some type of glutton for punishment, I found myself on the Sega Retro wiki looking for Dreamcast games that supported the keyboard peripheral. So I thought that doing the two Evangelion typing games, doing translation patches for them was actually, as torturous as it was my first foray into translation patch development on the Dreamcast, and it was tremendously rewarding because of how big of a challenge it was. So I thought, maybe there's actually some other little, cheesy Japanese typing games out there that could receive, kind of similar treatment. But what I ended up finding on that list was a game called Nakoruru. And I started looking into it, and I realized, wow, this is a visual novel with some type of Samurai Shodown affiliation or kind of a spin-off nature. And the deeper I researched it and looked into it, I thought, wow, this would be such a great game to tackle for my next project, albeit one that I knew would take a long time. And really, this project took us just shy of 2 years to complete. But I'm a huge fan of visual novels, and I don't really have any qualms with repeating myself on this one. The Police Knots English translation done by the guys over at Junker HQ. The work they did on the Police Knots translation is really what inspired me to get into this scene to begin with. And it's a visual novel with a lot of action pieces, great cutscenes. And so I thought, Lewis, there are no English language visual novels on the Sega Dreamcast. And, it makes sense. Hey, was there a Western appetite for those types of games back then? Sadly, the answer is no. And nobody who's in the translation patch development community or scene has decided to try to tackle one of them on the Dreamcast. So this will actually serve as the first ever English language visual novel, albeit, an unofficial patch for the Dreamcast. So I started looking into it. Obviously, you got to scope out feasibility, level of effort, make sure that you can pick the game apart, kind of at least get some basic proof of concept together. And the rest is history, which we are going to step through on this episode.
Indeed, yeah. I remember you talking about the potential of translating a visual novel to me. I mean, there's 100 that were over 100 that were released on the Dreamcast in Japan. You know, this is a genre that, you know, it's enjoyed a very quiet following outside of Japan, but you know, it's a complicated genre. I think as one of the points I made when I spoke with Mike about them on a previous podcast was I wouldn't recommend a visual novel to my friends who like games, but I also wouldn't recommend them to, you know, my friends who enjoy reading. You know, that it's kind of they have this weird grey area. It's like, it's not really a game, it's not really a story, but I just recommend people give them a chance. You know, if you just want something quiet to kind of relax you, you know, and just read and make choices and kind of have that ability to have some kind of influence over the narrative that you're reading. I find that kind of aspect of them really interesting. But yeah, Nakoruru I'd heard about from Mike of the Dreamcast Junkyard, and you know, he was talking to me about it because he was telling me about all these different exciting sort of almost like collector's editions in Japan. Like I was saying before, they package these standard games with like all these goodies just to entice the Japanese Dreamcast audience back then into buying them. And Nakoruru was one of them. And I was like, what, there's a Samurai Shodown visual novel? That sounds really interesting. And when Derek said, I've been looking into this game, Nakoruru, I was like, oh my God, you know, that's amazing. And hosting Derek on the episode he was on previously, I'd kind of learnt from that episode about the assembly line process that these translations go through. From the translator translates a line, and then the editors come in and they make it sound a little bit more natural, a little bit more, I guess, accessible to English-speaking audiences, and then someone like Derek will hack that back into the game. And I've always, you know, I edit for the Dreamcast Junkyard, so I was like, I could do something like that. I'd be really interested to. And so when he said Nakoruru was the game he was thinking of next, I was like, sign me up straight away.
Love it. Yep, the stars aligned, my friend, and here we are, about 2 years later, recording this this podcast episode. Yeah, and to just give a little more detail into, you know, the core team and really how they came to the project. Marshall Wong was actually the first person who responded to my open call for translators. So even though I do have, you know, a lot of friends in this scene and people who, you know, kind of all work on each other's projects, this was a bit different. Partially because the scope of a visual novel like this, with over 12,000 unique lines of dialogue, you know, is pretty big, and you know, needed somebody who would be dedicated time-wise. It was partially that, but also partially because a lot of the actual, you know, translation friends I do have were tied up in other projects, and I didn't want to have to, you know, wait to get things off the ground. So Marshall was the first one who came along. Lived in Japan for a number of years. He's of Chinese descent. His two daughters were born in Japan, his wife there, so he had a lot of Japanese proficiency. And then later, Duralumin came along, and he's actually a professional translator. And he does a lot of manga fan translation stuff on the side. And you know, and I'm sure, Lewis, you agree, right? Dura, he really brought a great new angle to you know, really bringing that Japanese to English script to life. There's just so much nuance, and there's so much to localizing Japanese humor and situational comedy and other things, and to bring that into English, like Duralumin really had that fine-tooth comb, and he did an excellent job. We also had Piggy / Witch Piggy came in a little later. Didn't necessarily function as a full-blown translator, but did help a bit in that capacity. But namely, the contribution was a lot of expertise in the Samurai Shodown universe, the lore, the spellings, the story. You know, because even though it is a fighting game, it's been around for decades now. So it does have an established, you know, kind of universe. and then get into a little bit later. But Nico, Danthrax, and Lacquerware also contributed in different ways, whether we're talking about graphics or translation assistance. And anybody who's ever had to collaborate with a volunteer group before on any type of labor of love knows that you can count yourself as a very fortunate person if all members are amped, excited, are contributing, and are consistent. And I am so proud of the team that worked on this, and we definitely had that. In some ways, to use a cheap expression here, it felt like lightning in a bottle, and there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of differing of opinions, but we worked out all of those differences. We ultimately brought the best from each member, and the result is the game that everybody can experience today. So incredibly rewarding couple of years.
On a more amusing note, the fact that obviously I hail from the UK, you're over in New York.
Yes.
And the other guys, I think, sort of are American or Canadian, who we worked with, and so there was quite an amusing clash with Britishisms and Americanisms. We translated it into American English as the default. And so there was a lot of times when I was putting in like British spellings, like colour with a U versus colour without, just very little spellings like that. And obviously, occasionally someone would pick that up, and it was like, Lewis, you did this, and I was like, oh God, not again. So, and then there was a few times where I really found a way to summarise something as a character was saying, using a British like idiom or sort of saying, but then maybe you guys would come back and say, oh, this isn't something that people would say in America. But because that's the thing, we want this translation to be as accessible as possible to people who speak English all worldwide. And one of them, for example, was, I think you suggested someone say, what am I, chopped liver? Which I had no clue what that meant. And I think a few Americans who we've spoken to have been like, what? You don't know what that means? And it means like, I don't know how you'd summarize it. Like, am I not important? Is that kind of what that means?
Yeah. Usually it's brought up in context where somebody is saying something or doing something that all of a sudden makes you seem completely irrelevant or unimportant, right? What am I, chopped liver?
Yeah.
It's great. It's a great expression.
Yeah, that's one that got taken out just for the purpose of making the game more universal for the English speakers that it's aimed at. There was a few sort of British terms. I think one of them was like, I wanted a character to say, like Nakoruru often says to Mikato, don't worry, you don't have to be so polite all the time. And there's a phrase in England where we say you don't need to stand on ceremony, and I don't think that's something that people use everywhere. So I kind of just ditched that. I was like, okay, we're gonna have to figure out something better to say.
That expression definitely is used here, though. I think if you polled people on the street, you'd be lucky to maybe get like 15% of folks saying, oh yeah, I know that one. And those who do know it, you would ask them, when's the last time you used it?
Yeah.
And they would just say, I don't know if I ever have.
Yeah, like I guess I'm moving away from like Americanisms, Britishisms. There's also just words that can summarize something so perfectly. Like I think one of the most famous examples is in one of the Final Fantasy games. A person says, you spoony bard, to a character who is a bard. And spoony, everyone made fun of this. They're like, this is a really silly translation. But if you look at the definition of spoony, it means like someone who's overly sentimental. So in the context of the line in Final Fantasy, that is actually a good word, but people didn't realize what the word meant because it's an archaic word that we don't really use anymore. So we had to just make sure that like all words that we used were, spot on, basically. Yeah, so, and also another thing in the game is the lore. So this is obviously a spin-off of Samurai Shodown. So a lot of lore kind of transfers over to this game, but also there's a lot of ways in which it deviates, and Piggy, who Derek mentioned, helped with that as well, and also Duralumin. Like, there's a lot of references to various Samurai Shodown characters. So just to preface as well, this game can be played regardless of if you know Samurai Shodown lore like well or even at all, but if you do know it, like, there's a few kind of references to different characters and like jokes that are kind of occasionally referenced, and they are little kind of wink nudge kind of moments for fans of that series. But another amusing thing really is that when Samurai Shodown was first translated, it's kind of well known for having a bit of an awkward translation. I think one of the most famous things is it says "victory" when you win in the original game, and there's a few kind of names of moves that the characters do that aren't quite the best translations possible, but and Duralumin did say, like, this would probably be better translated as this, but we all agreed to kind of honor these established names for these various things, in the lore in this translation, just, to keep it consistent with what the fans expect.
Lewis, speaking of some of those wink, wink, nod, nod, or nudge, nudge, I don't know what it is. Speaking of those moments, there actually is that scene with the sages, who, for those not familiar with the game yet, you'll find out if you decide to play it. But basically, they're just 3 old ladies who are, kind of staples of the village. There is a scene where they're just kind of tormenting the poor protagonist Mikato, and they start doing voice impressions, and the voice impressions themselves are of Samurai Shodown characters, and they actually used the original clips from the games. And Mikato says, "Wow, how did you make your voice do that?" Right? So they definitely there's more than a few times with the cheap fan service, but I mean, honestly, I love that kind of stuff, so I thought it was great.
Yeah. There is one particular scene, but you have to find it. You have to do a specific set of choices to get to it, but it references the character called Galford, who has feelings for Nakoruru in the lore, and so there's kind of a reference to that as well, which someone actually tweeted at us. They were like, I hope that, like, he's referenced or something. So yeah, that's in there as well.
So Lewis, and speaking about some of the ways that we tried to match, move names with more proper translations and kind of compromising there. The other, kind of deviation comes about when we think of the actual established lore. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is established lore for a character in a fighting game, for Nakoruru and her sister Rimururu and their childhood. So I'm going to probably get some of these details crossed and muddled a bit here, but the long and short of it is that there's a difference between how this visual novel establishes her childhood and how she was adopted or by whom she was raised, and what the kind of standard Samurai Shodown universe dictates. So, as we're reading through this script and dealing with direct translation before kind of polishing it up and editing it, we're starting to notice, she's talking about a stepmother, and then she's just calling her mother. And then she's talking about her grandparents, which are supposed to be the ones who actually raised her according to established lore. But in this game, they're just kind of there onto the side. And she had a stepmother and a stepfather who, by the way, wasn't actually her stepfather. I mean, we must have spent so much time going back and forth trying to figure out just what the frig these developers or writers were coming up with here.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate, hey, listen, there was a shallow story for this character, and this game was meant to either flesh it out or maybe take some, creative liberties and, kind of spin it anew. So my first initial, kind of instinct was, no. We cannot let, whatever this developer did deviate too far from the story, because, anyone out there in the English-speaking world who knows Samurai Shodown well will play this and look at us like we just, It'll be like the Godfather meme. Look what they did to my boy, right? Like, look how they massacred my boy. They would have been, they'd have been like, what did you, I don't understand. Why does she have a stepmother? And who's this stepfather guy? But listen, like, that was the story. And the further we got through the plot, we realized, or I realized, and I kind of came around, listen, there's no way to, we can't avoid it. It would be like a massive story rewrite. Like, it has to go this way. The relationship with her mother, stepmother, whatever, it's very important for how, things unfold as the game progresses. So that was very interesting to me. And there was more than one occasion of that. It's hard to remember now all the specifics over the last 2 years, but yeah, Lewis, those moments were definitely fun to work through.
Yeah, and there is something I've actually seen on a few of like the online discussions about this game prior to obviously us translating it, where I can actually just find it here on the SNK wiki, where it says the game apparently begins with the first game and ends the same time as Samurai Shodown 2, though an exact year is never stated. What I'll say there, without giving any spoilers, is this game does not take place during any Samurai Shodown game. I won't explain why, but I just treat it as kind of a separate story, removed from the kind of original games in a way, but featuring the same characters. That's all I'll say.
Well said. Yes, yeah. Well said, and an important disclaimer. I think it can be simply stated as this, and you tell me if you agree. If you are a Samurai Shodown fan who is interested in playing visual novels, you will like this. If you are interested in playing visual novels but have never even heard of or played Samurai Shodown, I say you will like this, but that's our hope, right? This will be a game for you. It doesn't really matter what you come to the table with. It stands alone unto itself.
Yeah. One thing that the game actually explores more in deeper detail is actually that Nakoruru is a person of the Ainu culture. So the Ainu people are an indigenous people from kind of around the Hokkaido region of Japan. Unfortunately, over time, they've slowly disappeared. And I think like there's maybe like 10 people now who maybe still speak the language.
I can't give you a head count of speakers of the Ainu language, but it's one of those near-dead languages that, really comes in two flavors. It's being studied by some people at a university, or there's a very, very, very old lady somewhere who speaks it, right? And that's that's the type of language it is. But what's really cool, and something that I was naive to before starting this project, is that Nakoruru herself, the clothes she wears, even her move names, the names of her different moves in the fighting games, they're all indicative of her belonging to this group. And learning about these people, learning about their culture and the fact that the game takes place several hundred years ago, makes all of that very relevant again. Their culture and their way of life is alive and thriving. And there's even a moment or two in the game where they mention, other parts of Japan, it's very, very, very interesting, especially from a translation and localization perspective. So, personally, I kind of saw it as I would say a personal mission to try to preserve the Ainu component or character in this game as much as possible. So, we worked to teach players as much as we could about these people and about the language, especially terminology, right? Because, Lewis, as you remember, there's tons of moments where a term will get thrown around and then it gets referenced like 90 times throughout the game. And you realize okay, we're going to have to teach the player what this word means. And we effectively did that. And in very rare cases, there could be a direct localization, but in most cases it was hey, listen, we're going to use the word as is. We're going to establish what it means. It's going to be very, very clear. And from there, it becomes part of your player's vocabulary.
Yeah, I got the impression that perhaps it was written in a way perhaps Japanese people may at least be aware of these terms, because as far as I can remember from the original Japanese, it didn't explain what some of these things were. It just said, like, for example, the food that Nakoruru makes, like the stew, it just kind of mentions the name of it. I guess, presuming that like the Japanese players know what that means. So I guess they're at least aware. Whereas, you know, if you ask anyone in the UK or America, like, you know, do you know what this means? They're probably not going to know. So we had to kind of help out a little bit there.
Yeah. Have you heard of rataskep? Well, it is a stew.
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
But, you know, Lewis, anytime a language kind of starts to die, the words that always live on are going to be ones that you use in the kitchen. Inevitably, It's always going to be culinary terms. So I'm not surprised that, you know, the expectation would be there that your average, you know, native or culturally Japanese person would have at least heard of these terms.
There was also a song in the game, and Lacquerware helped with that.
So this is a huge part of, well, like a critical component of the, you know, kind of final chapters of the game. But it's introduced and kind of sprinkled throughout the entire story, which is great. There is a very special or secret, almost magical song used in the game. You'll hear it a number of times as you play. And essentially, its lyrics are in Ainu. So even as a native Japanese speaker, you essentially stood zero chance of, you know, actually understanding kind of what the song meant, what the lyrics meant, and throughout the story, one of the mini games that you are presented with is to learn the lyrics, and this was a fun one in terms of all the hacking and programming stuff. But, you know, essentially, it was a real head scratcher at one point early on in the project, right? Trying to amass resources on the Ainu language, dictionaries, you know, Ainu to Japanese translations, things of that nature, and looking at these mini games for how the player was to learn what these Ainu lyrics meant in Japanese. And without getting into too many details or going too deep into a rabbit hole, it was just there were more questions than answers. And Lacquerware, who some may know from his translation and localization work on Bulk Slash and Stellar Assault English patches on the Saturn, he actually got back to me and said, you know, hey, I actually found an old Japanese message board, you know, probably from the Wayback Machine or, you know, archive.org or whatever, where they're talking about these games and actually talking about the context of the lyrics. And kind of, you know, sharing that with me really helped the project, at least in that sense, you know, regarding this mini game, turn a corner. And, you know, it was a big moment, and, you know, light bulb moment. Oh, I see. And then I was able to effectively, you know, kind of hack those games to make sense for the English speaking audience. So thank you, Lacquerware.
Yeah, awesome. I believe we got some help as well with graphics.
Oh yeah. And it's so funny, Lewis, because my patience for dealing with graphics work on translation patches has like all but evaporated. I did so much on this project. I basically did all the graphics except for the logo. I did my first draft of the logo that was like okay, but this guy named Nico I think he saw one of my Twitter posts, you know, about, hey, I'm doing this game, and I don't know if I openly asked, hey, does anybody want to try to make a logo that matches the original Japanese style? Anyway, it was quite a while ago, but he did, and it's gorgeous, and I love it.
Yeah.
And then Danthrax, also of Stellar Assault and Bulk Slash fame, he, if you play the game and you look at the little icon on your VMU, you know, not talking about the VMU mini games, which we'll get into later, but just look at the icon that gets displayed while you're playing. He did the stylized English text over the little graphic of Nakoruru's face. But yeah, back to the kind of the main corpus of the graphic work there, Lewis. The only thing in English in terms of graphics and the vanilla retail Japanese version is the press start button texture on the title screen. Everything else was in Japanese, and of course it was all, you know, very, very fancy stylized text with a lot of effects. And, so I did all of that work trying to match the styles, matching the different fonts being used. And then for the entire ending credit sequence, basically re-rendering all of the background images and overlaying the English credits text over them. It was a lot of work. And I say my patience has all but evaporated because on more recent projects that are still in development, I basically completely outsourced graphics 100%. Like I can't bring myself to do them most of the time these days. I don't know. But I'm glad I did for this project because this is the type of game where you needed to really, the person doing the graphics and the person testing how everything looked needed to be either sitting in the same room or just be sharing the same brain. So in this case, they were sharing the same brain because it was me. Yeah,
I will say, Derek, I'm really sorry for making you redo the graphics.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You scumbag.
In the intro sequence, all the text that appears is graphics, and you did it as a first proof of concept and then put it in. And then as I was playing the game during play testing, I was like, we could say that slightly better. I think it was at least twice that you had to go back and edit, and I'm really sorry about that.
No, what's funny is, so just because it's graphics and it's so much, it can be so much work to do one small change. I was like, oh gosh, no. Trying to rationalize why what we have is okay. And no, it's good enough. But no, you were 100% right. Those changes are much better. And every single time I watch that opening sequence and I think about what it used to say, I am very glad that it has been tweaked and altered.
Yeah.
But also, I don't forgive you.
I remember thinking, oh no, this will be better, but I know it took a lot of work. But speaking of a lot of work, the font of the game, just to give people a behind the scenes peek, the amount of effort that Derek put into making this font look good. And it's one of those things where you think it's just such a small detail, but with a game like this where a lot of it is just you're reading a story, you want that font to be as legible and a look as nice as possible. And we had a font that was okay, but Derek put in a lot of work to get it looking as beautiful as it does in the final release that we put out.
You said it, and you were 100% right that it can, on paper, maybe look like a small detail, but given that it's the primary way with which the player is kind of interacting with the game, i.e. reading, it is arguably the most important component for a translation patch of this kind, right? And in the, ROM hacker patch developer circles, font hacking is it's probably like the coup de grace. Like, it's the number one thing that gets discussed. It's the thing that will basically make or break a project. Hey, if I can't hack the font effectively or up to my standards for this game, I'm just not doing it. But thankfully, I was a little naive. So as we kind of shift into this discussion here on the ROM hacking programming aspect of this project, and I want everybody to think about, who might not be familiar with a lot of these things, want everyone to think about looking at Japanese text, whether, written on a piece of paper or displayed, in a Word document on a website or in a video game. Consider the fact that typically Japanese characters are going to be, oftentimes equally wide as they are long, right? And you think about how much space, how much screen real estate in the context of a video game Japanese text consumes. You can express a complex idea in fewer Japanese characters than you can in English or any other Latin-based alphabet characters. Each of our characters are representing a consonant or a vowel, and we have to construct the entire sound of a word using individual letters or groupings of letters. Japanese has some concept of that too. However, there's also kanji that in a single character can represent, an entire word or more than one word or an idea. So we've got a combination of two things working against us here. One, you need a lot less space to convey the same idea in Japanese. And two, the individual characters or the tiles from the font are very wide, much wider than you would want if trying to represent English text. So part of font hacking in any type of translation patch, it's going to, essentially come down to two components. One is assembly hacking the game. In other words, actually alter-lying the compiled code. So we're not talking about access to source code over here, unless SNK wants to do that, in which case, yeah, we're on board. We're talking about modifying the compiled code and writing new assembly to essentially tell the game, hey, instead of taking every tile from the font sheet when you're rendering, a string of text, instead of putting each one, let's say in the case of this game, 22 pixels apart from each other, I'd like you to do it every 16 pixels, essentially giving us a half-width font that gets us twice as much screen real estate. And then the second component, in addition to the tile spacing, is actually modifying the font sheet. In other words, think of it like a graphic that contains each and every one of those little characters that comprise the font. So once I was able to get that tile spacing done so that we had nice 16 pixel wide characters or tiles rather, I went through like multiple iterations of trying to find a mono-spaced font that, would look very good on screen. In addition to that, looking for an alternate version in italics that we use for the inner voice or inner monologue of the protagonist, of you, the player, Mikato. So as you're playing, you'll see, spoken dialogue will appear in a certain font style, and the speaker's name will be all capital letters and written in an orange tint. And then when it's internal monologue that's just supposed to be private for you, the player, it'll be italicized. And as you're kind of playing a visual novel like this over minutes and hours, that distinction between the two font styles really helps delineate, what is supposed to be just privately said in Mikato's head and what is supposed to be part of the, kind of the external experience. But yeah, Lewis, it was a massive undertaking. I want to thank Vincent NL again for teaching me some of the ways to kind of string together a hodgepodge of tools to do the RAM memory inspection and hacking on this one. It was a big turning point for me, and I'm really proud of how it came out.
That's amazing. Yeah, it looks amazing. There's so much more hacking related stuff to this game as well, such as the voice acted clips persisting across multiple boxes. That was one of the first issues that you ran into, if I recall. Yeah.
And I realize we do probably have a lot to touch on for the hacking programming stuff, so I'll try to keep all the points brief, my friend. But yeah, the font, I just wanted people to understand, namely when we're looking at Japanese games, bringing them to English, there's so many things to consider. But to that point about how much space English is going to take up, there are times when you need to render multiple text boxes in order to get one instance of dialogue across. So the game's default behavior was that when the dialogue box is progressed past, in other words, the player presses A to go to the next instance of dialogue, any voice acting, any clip being played from the voice actor is going to halt. And why wouldn't it? That's, expected behavior. However, since we need to sometimes render multiple boxes, essentially I modified the game so that it did not stop playing the voice actor's clip when you went to the next one. But in order to make that effective, I had to do a little trickery so that we didn't start getting multiple voice actors' lines being read in tandem, right? You can imagine it would just keep on playing until they end. So what I had to do was kind of insert this little control code that faked the game into thinking that it had to play a certain clip that would override the original one. And long story short, it works beautifully.
It does indeed, yeah. And like something like that is just polish, I guess, that you would see in an officially translated visual novel. And so you kind of brought that level of polish to this.
And kind of speaking of polish like that, Lewis, and I appreciate the compliment. There was also moments, things that you actually noticed where you said like, hey, I realize this is how the game is supposed to behave. I realize this is how the scene is supposed to play out. But don't you think that maybe we could like ramp up the dramatic effect, or potentially the scene would play out better if only we forced this or forced that? And there's a moment or two where we did do that. So I'm not going to give way into the details because it would literally be a spoiler. So we'll leave that one out there.
Yeah, there were a few kind of things you changed that, you know, perhaps some might think is like an intrusive change, but I think it's more of a quality of life thing. I think one of the most important ones was there's a few quizzes in this game. You get given kind of trivia quizzes, and we didn't want to just like put in loads of random questions that we decided on to make them easier for English speakers. We kept them as they're supposed to be, but I think you worked it out, Derek, in a way that would make them easy to Google. And you removed was it 10 seconds, I think?
No, it was 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
I still cannot believe that with these questions. I mean, Lewis, these questions, some of them were like, you know, let's make the American version. Which of these two places is known for fried chicken? And it's going to be like Kentucky or New York City. And any American's going to go, oh yeah, it's not New York. But there were questions like that, but some of them were so hyper specific into Ainu culture. I refuse to believe that anybody would know the answers to these questions who didn't grow up in that region and didn't have that kind of cultural background to fall back on. So I did rewrite a lot of them, but I made sure that I kept them relevant to Japanese antiquity or the Ainu people, but the criteria there, the success criteria, absolutely had to be able to find the answer to this question by using a search engine. Now, we also provided an answer bank completely filled out in the README on the GitHub repository, so those who don't want to, you know, kind of research these questions can cheat, for lack of a better term. But yeah, that was a big one. Needed to make sure people could actually stand a chance at answering those questions.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, playing through on my playtest, like, everything was so much easier because of those changes you'd made, you know, as far as me answering those questions. And I was getting like 10 out of 10 most of the time. Admittedly, I did have to Google. But yeah, if you do play this game, don't feel like you're cheating if you have to Google anything. It's, you know, it's some of these things we're not expecting you to know unless maybe you're an Ainu person. And then speaking of the quizzes, that's one of the many mini games that the game has. There's various ones. There's ones where you have to like dodge attacks, like training mini games that are pretty fun actually. There's a few that are kind of used once and never seen again. There's one where you have to like locate an item.
The pantry search.
Yeah, but then I think the engine's kind of reused for the bit where it's like foggy. Mm-hmm. And then you've got like the bit where, like that Derek mentions, where you have to learn the lyrics. There's a bit that's kind of like it's a different instrument. It's like the ocarina in Legend of Zelda, where you have to follow the pattern to play the tune. And I always really enjoyed those bits. And there's like a fishing mini game, which is sadly not compatible with the Dreamcast fishing controller. That would be incredible if it was.
That's so funny. I never even thought about that because this game supports the mouse, keyboard, and standard controller. Like you can literally play the whole game with only one of those, but it never occurred to me. Fishing game, fishing rod.
Yeah. It also supports the Rumble pack as well. Or if you're like me and just decided to be a bit different, I played through the whole game with the ASCII Pad FT, which has built-in Rumble, and it was beautiful. It was really nice playing it with that.
It was funny, the fishing mini game originally, when the two characters you're hanging out with there at the river, when they make their remarks about the fish that you caught or didn't catch each time you kind of cast out the reel, it was only spoken and there was no on-screen text. So I was able to add in, I would say subtitles, but they're not really subtitles. I just use the standard dialogue box format. So, you know, to the player, they're not going to know any different. But it was one of those little things where I encountered it and I said, well, this will not do. We cannot have this be the one part of the game that you don't know what they're saying, right? So,
Yeah. And then following on from that, you translated as well the VMU applications for the game, which are like a little clock app, which I think are really cool. You want to give the people out there a bit of info about that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So everybody out there in Dreamcast land knows there's always these fun little, VMU mini games or little throwaway applications. And the developers of Nakoruru were really into clocks. So not only do you have, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but well, actually, you know what? Let me just bundle these two things together because they're so closely related. So that little 35 megabyte, what's called the single density area of a GD-ROM. In other words, the part of the disk that if you insert it into a standard CD-ROM or DVD-ROM drive on your computer, the part that it can read. A lot of people know you throw in different Dreamcast games like Sonic Adventure, you'll find stuff like wallpapers, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
For this game, they threw, is it 4? It might even be more than 4. I think it's 4 executables. They're just little clock applications that can rest on your desktop and feature a character from the game. So, the little menu for those has been translated from Japanese to English, again, available on the GitHub repo. And then the little VMU applications are also clocks, but they also feature a little message from the character. So, if you download, Nakoruru's clock app to your VMU and go to launch it, she'll give you a little kind of throwaway line there. And figuring out the text encoding scheme that was used on those VMU applications and then displaying them in English was that was like days of work, but it was so rewarding. It was so fun to kind of finally figure it out. And, and I know you feel this way too, Lewis. It's just one of those things that makes the Dreamcast so awesome. Just this little detachable, piece of it that you can take with you, and somehow part of that gameplay experience just comes with you, right? It's so cool. And I wouldn't think about releasing this game without having those VMU apps in English as well.
Yeah, you get these. You basically you unlock the VMU apps by completing the game, right? And something we'll mention is that Derek put together a bonus disc that will allow you to download a complete save for you to get that, and then also the voice actors and actresses have little like blurbs about their kind of time working on the game. So little extras there. But yeah, to get the VMU apps, you would need to complete the game or download the complete save that Derek has put on that bonus disc that is bundled along with the release.
So to actually make it even more difficult for players, and this is something probably nobody else on the team who would have played it would have realized, because everybody would have been working with the fully unlocked save.
Oh, right.
Right. It's more than just completing the game. So the, Lewis mentioned some of the extras that come on the game, the VMU apps, the messages from the voice actors. There's also an image gallery. There's a music jukebox. Just completing the game doesn't necessarily unlock all of that. It'll unlock parts of it depending on the routes or the scenes that you saw. And I believe you only get the VMU apps when you've 100%ed the game.
Oh,
I know, because I in one of my many, many playthroughs of this, I went in vanilla, like I'm not going to use the unlock save, and I couldn't believe that none of the VMU apps were accessible. But I saw that only some songs were there, only some of the photo gallery or the CG gallery was there. So I can only assume, and it wasn't worth me looking into any further past that, I can only assume you only get the clock apps on the VMU once you 100% it, which is just crazy. It's like they don't want you to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Like, so it's such a great idea to have these clock apps on the VMU, but it's like, you can't get this unless you play this game for endless hours.
Oh, forget it.
For the sake of, don't get me wrong, obviously we've got the kind of bias because we're obviously part of this translation team. If I said, oh, look at this VMU app, you'd be, oh, that's fun. Like, it's very pointless, but it's like a fun addition. But having to play through like the entire game like multiple times,
I know, totally insane. So Good thing is that bonus disc that I put together, you get that unlocked save. And for those who are going to try it out, please pay attention to the warning message in red. If you've already got a saved game going on, do not download this unlocked save to the same VMU. It'll tell you in plain English, do not do it, because it stands a good chance of corrupting your save. And just to be clear, we're calling it a 100% fully unlocked save, but that doesn't mean that if you start the game, you go to download this after listening today, you get the bonus disc, you save it to the save to your VMU, you boot up the game. It doesn't mean that you can click on like continue story and all of a sudden the game is done. It's a totally separate save file. So this game is using a system file, and then there's little individual files for your story progress. So, people who don't want to play through every branch of this game 1,000 times, whatever, listen, just before you play, boot up that bonus disc, download the unlocked save, and then start a new game. You'll get all the benefits of, being a brand new player, never experiencing the story, but you also get all of that extra content on the main game. But back to that bonus disc real quick, Lewis. So you get that unlocked save. You also get a full length, and I call it a high quality OVA for a planned series they had, Nakoruru anime series that got canceled after the first episode. That episode is there on the bonus disc, subtitled in English, not by us, by the way. It's an old fan sub from back in the day, and it'll play on real Dreamcast hardware. So that's a little nicety there for anybody who is interested. And I'll just warn that within the first 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, there's a very brief NSFW moment, but very brief and mild. I
don't know if it's brief and mild. There's a bit later on where she full on has her top off.
Oh, and later in the episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, it is what it is. Just make sure you're not watching it with your 6-year-old.
Yeah. Well, so I think we've covered everything.
We've covered some great ground here today on this episode.
Yeah, and I obviously I implore everyone to just download the patch and give this a go, because this is a labor of love, but also like a lot of the reason why I joined this project is because I wanted to play this game, and I'm sure there's many out there who want to play it as well. I mean, a lot of the Samurai Shodown and Nakoruru fans are very excited to see that this has been translated. So I say give it a go. See what you think. You may not have played a visual novel before. Maybe this could be your entryway into a fairly obscure type of game.
I'd echo what you said. Definitely a huge labor of love. And, I can only imagine, and I don't mean this to be an egotistical type of thing at all, but I can only imagine if I weren't involved in this project and I saw this patch released, I would just be so giddy to see something of this magnitude in terms of just like the amount of translation effort behind it, to see something like that just be available for me to play. I mean, and this is why we do it. This is why I do it. I love this community. I love the scene, and I just want to give back to all the people that have just contributed and been there and given so much to me. And it's really a special thing. And if I do hear from anybody that they played the game and it kind of impacted them, let's say, emotionally in the same way that it impacted us here, on our team with the story. It would mean a lot to me to know that, Lewis, you and I, and the work that we did with Marshall, Dura, and the others has, it's affected people in that way, because it really is quite the tale.
Yeah, because the thing is, a lot of the translation, I'm just looking at script documents, and then to actually play it and be like, wow, like, this is what we've been working on for 2 years was pretty mind-blowing. So yeah, I do really hope that people enjoy it as much as we have. So Derek, now that Nakoruru's over, what is your next project? Do you want to tell the people out there?
A beach in Hawaii. No, just kidding. Some people would think I'd probably want to take a big hiatus, but I've got Cool Tune, another SNK title, and I joked last week. I said, "Yeah, I'm just trying to work up maximum threshold from an SNK cease and desist letter over here."
Yeah.
But cool tune. It's in its final kind of stages. I'm not going to give any type of estimated release. I'm hoping before the summer is over. But it's another highly polished English translation patch, and it's funny because it is definitely one of those games that you could kind of tell yourself, oh yeah, you could still play it without knowledge of the Japanese language, but you are robbing yourself of like 80% of what that game has to offer, which is like a lot of great story, hilarious characters, just humor and puns and plays on words, which you could imagine was a joy and a half to translate.
You can't go back after playing a translated version of a game. It's like Napple Tale, another fan translation I love. Like, I've been playing it, and just the kind of the world and like the weird characters and the humor. It's like, you could play the platforming sections all you want on an import, but it's just so much better when you can actually understand what's going on with the plot, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And Kargadin, shout outs to Kargadin, who did the translation on Napple Tale, which I think still stands as one of the best English translation patches available for the Dreamcast. She did, along with another person, the translation for Cool Tune. So you get the same, kind of fun translation and awesome kind of language there. And in addition to that project, Lewis, one of the other consoles I've kind of gotten into for translation patches of all things is the FM Towns.
We're really ticking off the bingo card of obscure consoles today.
Yes, that's right. So I did one English translation patch for the Towns already, and I'm working on another one, but it's a visual novel, the other one, and it's not massive, nothing like this game, but it's at least half. So it's going to be a while, and it's no real timeline. It's kind of like a side project. But yeah, I've got a few ideas for the next Dreamcast game, Lewis. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, we will see. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and so where can the people find you online to check out all of the hard work you do, Derek?
You can find me on my website, dreamcastforever.com. Maybe one day Sega will offer to buy that domain off of me for like $1 million. That's the hope.
Yeah.
But dreamcastforever.com, if you go to the contact section, I've given a multitude of ways to get in touch with me directly. And then if you go to the translations and patches section, you can just take a look at all the work I've done on Dreamcast and other consoles there.
Excellent. As for myself, you can find me at LewisJFC on Twitter, and you can also find me on the Dreamcast Junkyard, writing blog posts on there. So the address is www.thedreamcastjunkyard.co.uk. We also have a Discord, we have a Facebook, YouTube. We're on everything, so just search us and you'll find it. But we also have a buy me a coffee page, which as a means to donate to kind of cover server costs and hosting costs. And just wanted to shout out a few people on there who have donated recently. So we've got Bruce Wayne 911. Thanks, Bruce. We got P Doherty 926, Dean Taylor, and Ross, the developer behind Harley Quest, who was on a few episodes back. Thank you very much, Ross, for that. It's very generous. So yeah, that the address for the donation page is buymeacoffee.com/DC Junkyard. And yeah, so it's been a pleasure to have you on, Derek, as always. And, it's really exciting to be able to finally talk about Nakoruru now it's finished. It's pretty mind-blowing and surreal, to be honest, to be here talking to you about this finished project. I've probably tried to plug it about 50 times on the pod during the space of time we were working on it, but here we are finally talking about it, so it's been good.
Absolutely, and the pleasure is entirely on this side of the table. Thank you so much for having me on. And above that, thank you for all the dedication that you gave this project over the last 2 years, and just being a part of the vision, man. It was I couldn't have done it without you, so thank you.
Cheers. Same to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. Until next time, keep dreaming.
This is a Dreamcast disc. 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 And is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now.